You are now listening to the Pelicans post-game report. Flash report.
Well, I mean, I think if you're Brandon Ingram, that you're looking at what Jamal Murray just got, and you're thinking, wait a minute, 4 for 208 that's my number, right? That's the most you can get in an extension here. Why am I not getting that number here? And I think if you're the Pelicans, you're looking at it like, okay, we've committed to Zion, we traded for DeJounte Murray, and we still have CJ McCollum left on a pretty good number, and we've got Trey Murphy, who's a rookie extension eligible, which is another big storyline for. So, is there a compromise that we can reach here? And it's similar to Ingram, like, okay, he could, and maybe in different circumstances, he probably is a max player, but what's the market for him? Right? What's the market for him in 2025? We talked about Brooklyn really as the only, with Brooklyn come in and give him $40 million a year, $45 million a year based on their timeline here. And you're right. It's like when you create an illusion as far as when we use the word max, as far as what certain players think what they are. And the middle class, I think, with this CBA benefits a lot. Like we saw TJ McConnell get an extension here. There's those guys, those like 12 to 30. You're kind of pegged. Like sixth man gets a certain number here. Your third best player is at a certain number here. And it is fascinating as far as, and then you mentioned what happened last week. Does the Ingram situation present a distraction when training camp happens in 3 weeks? That's the biggest thing. And certainly, and that will continually hang over their heads. Like I thought, Cleveland could have been a potential fit, certainly before they extended, Jared Allen, who's not, eligible to be traded because he signed that extension. But what does Cleveland do with Ingram when they already got Mobley on a max and Mitchell on a max and Garland on a max and stuff like that? So it does present a challenge as far as finding him a new home if there's no deal reached.
So I'm glad you brought up Cleveland, because that fake trade construction of Allen for Ingram, and you'd have to have other stuff around it. It seemed to get like traction in NBA talking heads and social media. I never really understood why Cleveland would do that.
Yeah.
Even if I could sit here and make the argument that Brandon Ingram 1-for-1 is a better basketball player than Jared Allen, he wants to make more money. We'll see if he makes more money. Like, I just don't really like, what is the point of having Garland, Mitchell, and Ingram? Now, if you're telling me that, like, well, then I can go trade Darius Garland and reorient my team that way, and okay, but that's like 3 or 4 steps, and it's a little bit more complicated than that. But I guess that could be the argument. Like, we trade Garland to wherever for other assets that fit better, and we have Donovan Mitchell as our point guard, maybe in Ingram on the wing. But I never loved that one, and I never since it got much traction. Maybe you're right. Maybe what happens here is the most rational situation, where they just come to an agreement on an extension that's south of the max and makes sense for the Pelicans. It makes sense for Ingram, but it's interesting. Just like Trey Murphy III's extension feels like a bigger priority for them than Brandon Ingram's, which is strange. At all last year, Trey Murphy III has to start for the Pelicans in 2024 or 25. It has to. That's going to be over. I would suspect, short of a trade, which still has not happened, they're starting 5. Just like, if he's got to start and Herb's got to start and Ingram and Zion have to start because they're Ingram and Zion, and DeJounte Murray has to start because it's DeJounte Murray. Well, there's your 5 guys right there. You're starting with Zion at center, and you're going to figure it out. And that's kind of a switchy, funky lineup defensively that could be interesting. But why Trey Murphy is really interesting to me is, if Brandon Ingram is traded, what does Trey Murphy III's scaling up on offense look like? Because those 15 points right now are coming on threes, on closeouts, like driving against closeouts, pump and go. He's got an incredible pump. People treat him, and I think he's earned it, almost like a Klay Thompson level shooter, and how close people play him. And he's very smart at leveraging that sort of pressurized defense for driving opportunities. And then in transition, if you actually look up, Kevin Pelton, who the most efficient pick and roll ball handler in the league was last year in terms of points produced out of their pick and rolls, minimum 100 picks, it's Trey Murphy III. Almost 1.4 points directly out of each pick and roll. but only 4 pick and rolls per 100 possessions. So I don't know what him scaling up is. Maybe it's using him as a screener more. He's a great movement shooter. He can set ball screens. So you hide a small guy on him. He screens for Zion. He screens for Ingram, whatever it is. But and defensively, he's got to reach another level too. He's got to get a little more stable on defense. But it's more the how far can this scale up? Because this guy's already a really, really good role player, a really high level role player. He's extensionable, eligible. If he gets extended, it's going to be for a lot, and deservedly so. I just am curious to see what's next in the offensive development.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a couple of forwards who got traded together from Phoenix to Brooklyn who are kind of interesting comparisons for him. Because Mikal Bridges is someone who, he leaned more heavily on the D side of the 3-and-D equation than Trey Murphy, but was able to grow past that role into someone who, to some degree or another, was able to be a go-to scorer for the Nets the last couple of seasons. And then, now has all the more value when you put him back in a secondary role or a tertiary role in New York. Or is it more like Cam Johnson, who, very just a great role filler, great shooter, capable defender across, multiple positions, but didn't prove to have a lot more juice even when put in a situation where he, more offense was potentially needed from him in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and Trey Murphy, I think, is a little bit more explosive of an athlete than Cam Johnson. He's got a good first step and a better second step when he gets some momentum. He doesn't one-on-one. He is not someone who's going to roast bigger guys on switches. He will shoot over point guards on switches off the dribble, which is very encouraging. But if one person runs a pick and roll and gets him the ball, and his defender even has to take a half step to close out on him, he's really good at a little pump fake, get you up in the air and go. And once he gets a runway, he's really explosive and really good at getting to the rim. His passing in that exact situation with sort of the floor in motion, the defense rotating, has to reach another level, and that's comes with experience and time. I'm really optimistic about him. I'm just curious to see what it looks like. Maybe it's just more of everything, more shooting, more roving around, more. He's a very smart mover off the ball. I love Trey Murphy III. I'm intrigued by.
I'm going to pick an intriguing team. I'm just throwing the rules to the win.
That's it's people for a reason. You can go in any direction you want.
New Orleans Pelicans.
All right.
I was just gonna bring up. That's what I was gonna bring up. So here we go.
I had Zion next on my list, so let's go.
Well,
yeah, I had Zion and Brandon Ingram as a tandem, so perfect.
Right. So so obviously you've got Zion and Ingram. Zion was having a very good year last year.
Can I make one quick addendum on that?
Yeah.
Zion was healthy. He was very productive last year. Didn't make the All-Star team. Didn't make an All-NBA team. If you'd said Zion Williamson had the year he had a couple years ago and played 70-plus games, you'd be like, oh, he's going to make All-NBA. He's going to be, and he was sort of an also
but then he got hurt
a forgotten guy. Well, no, he got hurt in the playoffs, but I'm saying even during the year, he was sort of a forgotten guy at this point.
Right. All right. So we've talked about Zion at length. We don't need to go. Zion is there. Brandon Ingram, who is another one of these guys going into the last year of his contract, has not worked out a deal with the Pelicans, and I'm not sure if one is in the offing in the short term.
But I would sort of say he fits the Trae Young bill too, right? Where they certainly they don't have a center on their team. I think there's a decent chance Zion's going to start at center, and that's because in part there was not a deal to be made to move Brandon Ingram to get them back a center.
Well, this is one of the reasons
for Ingram, he'd be gone.
Right.
Well, part of the reason why the market is tight is because he's made it clear he wants the max.
Exactly.
And it's for the same reason that the Pelicans don't want to give it to him. Another team doesn't want to import that discomfort, because he still had a pretty good year last year. He shot 50% or 49% from the field. His scoring was down, but he wasn't the same impact player he was in previous years. He's a guy who can do multiple things on offense. He handles the ball. He can initiate. He's a valuable offensive guy, incredible length. So he's very hard to defend. I've covered him.
But he's a 35% 3-point shooter who doesn't get to the line and doesn't shoot a lot of threes.
And he's also routinely had injury issues and not just one thing, multiple different things. And
He's not played 65 games since his rookie year. I just saw that looking at his stats, which is pretty wild.
Right. He's made one All-Star game. One All-Star game in what? How many years?
8 seasons.
8 seasons. This is stress max territory. Actually, I don't even really think he's not a max player at this point. I mean, he's just not.
No, but
well, if he was, he'd have an extension for one.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. So this is why the whole team is intriguing to me. As you guys, as we've talked about before, they don't have a center, so they're going to be playing weird. You got Ingram with a contract situation to deal with. They got to get Trey Murphy taken care of. I would assume that they would, but he's extension eligible. You've got to get him locked in. He wants paid. I don't blame him. Other people around the league excellent shooting wing have gotten huge deals, and he should expect it. And as of right now, if I'm not mistaken, the Pelicans are into the tax.
They are a couple million in. Yep.
And I don't think anybody in the league believes that they're going to finish in the tax. So the deals
never faded before.
That's right. The deals that they make during the season are going to be, at least in some way, to reduce payroll. So all of these things, there's a modicum of pressure on Willie Green to show, where he's at and that he can get the most out of this team. I think all of these things are factors. The Pelicans did something very unusual and never announced it. They gave Willie Green a contract extension after his first season. Very unheard of, especially for a guy who was a first-time head coach. And rightly so. Did a great job coming out of the gates. And then never announced it. And I think probably because they didn't want people to judge them for doing that. But he's also got to get this roster to develop or to play well. And there's some challenges. There's some tough things that, they've given him a lot of talent. And then you've got the situation where you're bringing in DeJounte Murray, great import of talent. Yeah. But you got to see how Willie Green and those guys adjust to putting him with CJ McCollum.
Well,
and how that fits.
Okay, you've got 3 guys that all need the ball. Zion can space it some vertically, but like DeJounte Murray, not a great spacer if he doesn't have the ball in his hands. Brandon Ingram, not a great spacer if he doesn't have the ball in his hands. You're not guarding Zion if he's standing out at the 3-point line. Like when you make the DeJounte Murray trade,
you're not guarding Herb Jones. Not that he's going to have the ball in his hands, but you're not really guarding him either.
And he improved as a 3-point shooter last year, but
even still,
right, you're going to live with that.
Still going to have to make him test it. Yeah, for sure.
And so when you went and you made the trade for DeJounte Murray, you're like, okay, let's see what they get for Ingram and then see how the pieces fit. And Ingram's still there.
Yeah, and certainly seems like they're going to go into the season starting DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson, which is a fascinating lineup on a lot of levels. And, they are a fascinating team. I'm glad you just said them as a team because they've got so much stuff going on. And again, we're talking about the Western Conference, as deep as it is. There's a lot of pressure on them, I think, to continue to build some momentum. And, look, like it's going to be a fascinating year on a lot of fronts, up to and including what happens with the roster. Because again, they've never paid the tax. They're like $3 million in right now after signing Javonte Green, which I thought was a good end of the roster signing. He's a guy who can definitely help them too. And they've got talent. So, let's see if they can push forward or if they're going to settle in a little bit.
Yeah, Zion at the 5 last year. I looked it up. Their net rating with him as the 5 was like +3 and change, 3 and pretty, 3.6, something like that. But it's a different deal if that's your primary lineup and you're going against other teams starting / closing lineups than it is if you can kind of, spot
your spots.
Especially if you're trying to keep that guy healthy. if that's one of their goals.
Subscribe now and stay up to date for all things New Orleans.